All right, so one of the things we've lost with the internet is the discernment and filtering of the sources of information that we get. And as always, I think of things sort of in a systemic way. People want to think, oh, if we do X, then it will fix things. And then the more we do X, the more we realize the problems with X. So we go, well, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll do the opposite. We'll do Y. And then the more we do Y, we go, oh, this doesn't work. The next generation tries X again because that wasn't the generation that had done X. That was the generation that saw why Y didn't work. So this is why we get these pendulum swings between, let's say, progressive and conservative values, or between gatekeeping and free information. So right now we're sort of in a free information era where we're getting information from places that are not gate kept. The reason why information is gate kept, historically, would be to assure the quality of the information that people were getting, to make sure that the people were being filtered who were giving that information. But there's a lot of power and control there. And in that kind of a system, people will misuse that power and control. So we said, okay, no, free information, that's what we want to do. So we moved to anybody being able to give information, anyone being able to put themselves forward with opinions, with authority, and that doesn't filter out people. That puts the burden of filtering for the person you're getting information from on the person receiving the information. Whereas before it was with the institution. But we're anti-institution. We've moved towards individual sources of information. But that means that's more on us to discern. Like, is this person a person who has good information? Are they a good source of information? They may not have institutional authority, but maybe they have some other kind of authority that gives this information weight. This is particularly impactful for victims of abuse because victims of abuse before the internet, and I remember this, before the internet, you were completely isolated in your local community that the abuser had influenced to look at you in a specific way. And it was very difficult to get out of that situation, and it was even more difficult to realize you were in the situation in the first place. This is one of the most difficult things for victims of abuse, is to recognize, oh, this is an abuse dynamic. It's not that I'm a terrible person who is the worst. It's that this is a situation that's set up in this way that is not only abusive and coercive, but also prevents me from going and getting outside help, or prevents me from leaving the situation. And so when the internet came around, victims of abuse were able to find each other. They were able to compare notes, essentially. They were able to say, oh, you've had this, I recognize this pattern. And then Lundy Bancroft wrote, Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Anger and Controlling Men. And that became basically the abuse victims' Bible for women. And basically they're passing around this book to each other. You know, you need to read this book. And then women would read the book and go, oh my, I know exactly which abuse type the abuser that I'm with is. Now, that book is not helpful for male victims of abuse, and it's very heteronormative, so it doesn't really help for, if you're in a non-heterosexual relationship, homosexual relationship. Like, for queer people, it's not as helpful because you have to kind of like read the situation toward yourself, taking it out of the gendered language, which can be kind of an extra cognitive layer that, if you're in an abuse dynamic, is not one that you're in a position to really do. So we see benefits from the internet, but we also see detriments to the internet. So now we have a bunch of people running around educating themselves, and then because people are obsessed with putting themselves above others, will then try and put themselves in authority over another person. Well, you're wrong. Here's why. I have all these buzzwords that I've learned from a person that I follow or watch, or information that I've gathered. I see this process all the time. People do not recognize that they themselves are not authorities on a specific topic or area. I learned this. I mentioned this in another video. I've learned this. One time I tried to have an argument many years ago about GMO apples, and I got quickly schooled on how I did not know anything about GMO apples. I did not know how apples were propagated. At the time, I thought you planted a seed, you got an apple, that's how we get apples. No, there's grafting, blah, 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 other things. And I, in that moment, went, oh, I need to recognize when I have an opinion and when I actually know what I'm talking about. And if I just have an opinion, do not touch it with a 10-foot pole. People are having opinions on things that they think are authoritative and factual, and they don't understand the concepts. They don't understand the arguments. They cannot put forward the totality of the situation and explain it. If you can't explain all of the aspects of the situation and why everyone is doing what they're doing or thinking what they're thinking, then you're not a person that is in a position to put yourself forward as an expert. Just factually speaking. Nope. So the thing about the internet too is a lot of the internet, now we have shifted more toward video, but the internet used to be very text driven. So when it's very text driven, you basically have people that are putting forward themselves in a way that if you saw them, if you knew what they look like, you would not take them as seriously as maybe the words are. They might be an excellent writer. They might be a smart person. But if you saw them, you would immediately go, oh, okay. Okay. This is an idea that is not for me. Or this is not something that has any, like, you will know it by its fruits. The fruits are not good. This is not somebody I should be listening to. So when you lose the visual element, you only have the ideas and the words. And so people who are smart and articulate and can well articulate their ideas are often putting themselves forward as experts on things they are not experts about. I actually recently had like a online whatever with someone who she cited a Lindsay Ellis video on Beauty and the Beast. And I was like, what the fuck is Lindsay Ellis like a sociologist or a research scientist, or are there study? No. Lindsay Ellis is a YouTuber with like basically a media background. Lindsay Ellis is not a person with a background in abuse. So this person is citing a YouTuber whose video they really liked and now is going around the internet using that as a source for all the stuff that they're writing. Okay. So another problem with the internet. So now we've got a bifurcation between the written and the visual. And how are we assessing the person behind the information? But also, who's spending most of their time online? We do intrinsically know this because there's that saying of like touch grass. Anyone who spends a lot of time online is often not interacting with actual people. So when again, I love the internet. I love the internet for victims. But the problem is the people who are on the internet are the people who are least likely to have real world information. Because most of the time, the people with real world information are out in the world doing real world shit. So you're not getting often those perspectives. You're getting the perspectives of people who are terminally online, who don't have a real world background. You can't assess their credibility. And so they are standing on the work and ideas of other people as if they're their own, as if they are educated in these areas. So I was having this argument. I didn't start it. I just made a comment and someone came in hot thinking they knew stuff. And I immediately knew this person had no idea what they were talking about because the way they responded to the Stockholm Syndrome piece of the discussion. The Stockholm Syndrome piece of the discussion. People think of Stockholm Syndrome as, a victim falls in love with their captor or a victim identifies with their captor. And also so much to the point it's to their own detriment. And the thing about the Stockholm Syndrome concept in the first place is it originated during an incident in Stockholm in the 70s during a robbery where the police were just like absolutely terrible at what they were doing. And it was one of the first incidences that had been broadcast on television, like kind of worldwide. So there was actually two different people. There was a robber and then there was like a separate guy who was holding people hostage. And in fact, the robber came forward and said something to the effect of, I'm not holding these people hostage. He'd gotten away. And then he did, as a result of coming forward, did get arrested. But he was so incensed that he was being blamed for this when he's like, this is not me. Anyway, so the hostage person in that situation that was taking the hostages. Well, one of the hostages realized, oh, the police don't know what they're doing and they are not making this a safe situation. They're making it worse. And at this point, the hostage taker seems to have a better handle on things and is more predictable and safe. So instead of just going along with the police, the hostages were basically like, okay, no, we're going to work through the hostage taker. And so the police came out with this essentially theory that, oh, they had Stockholm syndrome. They'd spent so much time with the hostage taker that they now identified with the hostage taker. And so we got this concept, this very mimetic concept that like went wide sort of in our culture and in our society. And then people passed it along to each other as if it's like real, as if it's a fact. Here's this fact I've learned. It's called Stockholm syndrome. And it's like there's layers here to me of, okay, so the inciting incident for the name of this syndrome is not even understood by the people using it. The syndrome name itself was come up with by people who are trying to deflect responsibility for their part in the horrible situation. And then the news took it, it went wide. And so now we have this very mimetic idea of the way a victim falls in love with their captor. That as we learn more about coercive control, and I want to say it's, oh, what's his name? Is it Evan Stone? Evan Peters? Who's the guy? Wait a minute. I got to look this up because this will annoy me. I just did one of his studies in my subreddit. And it will annoy me if I don't have the dude's name. It's Evan. Oh, for Pete's sake. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Trauma informed, IPV. Evan Stark. Is it Evan Stark? All right. It's there. It's a dude who basically has been doing a lot of research on coercive control. And so our current understanding of coercive control is essentially that if a victim is in a coercive dynamic, they do not have freedom and agency the way that we would understand a person to normally have in a situation or dynamic. So when the victim is making choices, they aren't, it's not that they shouldn't be responsible for their choices. It's just that you have to understand those choices in the context of the system of control in which they're operating. And also, especially if you grew up in that system, you don't even know what the options are that you can go get help. That said, I do want to make a caveat. If you are a person that has a child and you are in an abuse dynamic and there's children involved, you are responsible for those children. Yes, you are in a system of control. Yes, it is not fair, but also those kids have no ability to make any decisions, actions on their own behalf. They have no agency. And so even though it's unfair for the abused parent, they still have to take every measure to make sure the kids are safe. And that often ends up blowing back on victims of abuse because Child Protective Services will often look on them as having enabled the system of abuse and not protected the children. And quite frankly, I agree with that. Does it suck? Yes, it does. This is the abuse dynamic version of what we see when it comes to, parents and child support. If you're like, well, I had no say in whether or not this child was born and, it's not fair. I didn't agree to this. And then you still get slapped with child support. They're not doing it because it's fair or not fair. They're doing it because it's in the best interest of the child. And so that's what's happening here. So regardless of whether it's fair, it's still in the best interest of the child, which is why we approach it the way that we do. And the reason we approach it the way that we do is because children literally have no agency in their situation. And they have no concept for even anything that they could do. So I'm having this discussion with this person about Beauty and the Beast, and they don't recognize that, they don't understand sort of all the history behind Stockholm Syndrome. And they also made a comment to the effect of like, oh, well, because one of the planks of my argument that I was making is that, media, especially media for children, impacts children and their views of the world and how they see the world. And so that this story, as much as we love it and it's got great songs and we may even identify with the main character who is emotionally strong, even though she doesn't have a lot of like true agency. that it's still influencing children in a way that is detrimental. And this person basically said, well, actually, I think that speaks to someone's strength of mind. If you don't have the strength of mind to not just take on ideas. And in fact, I didn't even like this movie when I was a child. I really came to this movie when I was a teenager. Ma'am, teenager? Okay. Now I know you're basically a very, very young person because only someone who's like 20 or very young, like a very young adult, would think that being a teenager is not being a child. So in this person's mind, they thought, "Oh no, I'm not a child." And when I came to this story and integrated it into my identity, I was not a child, I was a teenager. And therefore this argument is wrong. And this is why you have to be careful about who you freaking follow on the internet, whose ideas you're paying attention to, who we're giving credibility to. Because this very young person was using words like deuterogenic. It sounded very academically rigorous, but she was wrong. And had no idea she was wrong. And I'm going to read to you one of the final comments because I was like, girl, you need to stop talking because this is legitimately damaging to victims of abuse. She said, oh my gosh, that's my response. I literally had to stop because I was like, this is actually she's basically arguing that Belle wasn't a victim of abuse because she wasn't in the tower the entire time. Yes, go ahead and show that you have no idea about coercive systems of control at all. But yet you're running around talking about how, putting yourself forward as having an opinion with authority and credibility. And you have no idea what you're talking about. And in this particular situation, it's wildly damaging. Okay, hold on. Let's see. It would be something like a captive falling in love with their captor if she was in there at the tower the whole time. That would be the abusive romance I keep getting assured this is. But she was in there for all of 5 minutes, hardly caring because losing her father seemed the more relevant matter on her mind. People with takes like yours act like she never left the tower, and I will never be able to wrap my head around how intellectually dishonest this is. Throughout the story, she is treated like no prisoner I've ever seen, with a grandfather clock she can brush aside with ease as her guard. It's actually laughably offensive to anyone who's been a true prisoner, and it gets worse. This is a young person who's very smart, who is online, who thinks she knows what she's talking about, and she's putting forward bullshit like this. Using very big words like deuterogenic. So you can't tell if the person on the other end of the texty is a person that even is worth listening to their information because we don't have the institutions necessarily that are pre-qualifying people. So when you are getting information, it's now on us to determine whether or not the person we're getting information from is accurate. And one of the other reasons why this is so important too is because abusers will put themselves forward as experts on you over you with authority and credibility, telling you about how bad you are, how wrong you are, how incorrect whatever opinion it is that you have is, that you don't get to make decisions for yourself because you're wrong. Not only do I firmly support a victim's ability to be wrong, because I think victims are wrong, but because it is important to preserve that as an idea because victims are not often wrong, but they're often psychologically dominated into thinking they're wrong. So it's important to recognize that you're allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to make mistakes. Now, obviously in context of harm and we're not harming people, but abusers will tell you you're harming them when you're not. Oh no, you're harming my feelings, my anxiety if you don't let me track you 24/7. That's not harm. That's unreasonable. It's not a reasonable relationship expectation to have. And if you're an adult, your parents shouldn't be doing that. And it's a different discussion for minor children. So you have no idea if the person on the other end of these comments, ideas, or anything is even an adult person with any kind of experience. Just because they use large words, just because they're a very smart person, you're honestly probably getting someone who doesn't know how to interact with other people, who doesn't have social skills. It's easier to do this. than it is to go out in the world and build relationships, right? Often people are online like this because maybe like Belle, they felt weird, the outcast, da da da. I mean, I was there. I mean, a lot of us have been there. A lot of us have been there, right? But there are children on the internet that have no idea, that they don't know what they're talking about. So when someone comes in and is telling you about who you are and what reality is, with authority, telling you what you think, telling you what you believe, telling you who you are, you're the authority on you. And if the information is credible, you'll get it from other people who actually care about you and like you, and pass it along in a way that is respectful of who you are, like with dignity. They're not using it as a weapon against you or permission to punish you, hurt you, harm you, abuse you. Just because someone thinks they're an authority doesn't make them one. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.